Very good morning, very good afternoon, very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining the HR Congress Techfest 2022 Summit. It's such a delight and privilege having all of you here. My name is Mihai Nagy. I'm the partner and head of content here at the HR Congress. So a couple of opening slides of warm welcome to all of you. We are very excited to be able to host this summit, and it wouldn't have been possible without the support of our partners. So please let me allow my gratitude to Oracle, Betterworks, Personio, Codility, and Border. 2.5 years ago, the whole world went to halt. Coronavirus hit, and as tragic as it was, it required us to drastically and fundamentally rethink how we work, how we operate. And it certainly it was a major shift. And what coronavirus allowed is also to experiment new ways of working and certainly leapfrog in the future. And technology enabled and helped us to be able to work remotely, to be able to continue operating. So 2021 was somewhat a stability. We started getting vaccinations, second, third rounds, and we were hoping that 2022 was, in fact, kind of becoming a new normal. But of course, we all know what happened this year: the rising inflation, the big resignation, the rising prices of economy, raw material, and of course, the major Russian aggression on Ukraine is still here. It still hinders. So it does impact organizations, not in a positive way, and economies and societies. So probably we need a new terminology. Before 2020, we talked about VUCA, but now entering 2021-22, it's a time for Bunny, describing the next generation business: the brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So how can we navigate this new Bunny world of work? And a recent survey by Gallup actually find out about how people want to work, and requires organizations to rethink how we offer the right employee experience by supporting people preferences to working. So before the pandemic, before 2019, 60% of survey respondents actually preferred working on site in the office. But now, after the pandemic, it's only 6%. And in fact, 60% of people prefer some sort of a hybrid setting. So we do still need the human connection. We want to go in the office. We want to spend time with our colleagues, their project teams. But of course, we want to have a freedom, and 34% prefer working fully remotely. So what does it actually mean to HR technology? Before the pandemic, the HR technology was more about the core HR system. But now the center of gravity has shifted, according to George Pershin, as a recent report came out in March this year, that obviously employee experience and talent intelligence systems are even more important in enabling to offering that customized one-size solution, one individualized solution to our people. So again, let me express my appreciation to our partners who make this summit possible, and they bring an amazing set of content to help you to navigate in these challenging, turbulent times. And what's on today's agenda? Let me just briefly explain what will happen today. After the opening session, we have two keynotes, very interesting, very inspiring keynotes. Ashish Malik will be here with us talking about the missing link and engaging employees, how AI can enhance the employee experience. And that will be followed by the most influential HR thinker 2022, Terry Tim's keynote speech on Reimagine Transformational HR, how HR can create value. It's a brand new presentation. It will be very provocative, very engaging. So I do recommend all of you to, of course, stay tuned. Right after the keynotes, we stop for a very short break, just 15 minutes. And then we break out to elective tracks. 2 tracks will be running parallel: the power of the employee and HR and transformation. Power of the employee, brought to you by Oracle, an amazing set of sessions, amazing set of speakers. Will be bringing you the latest ideas and thinking, and of course, how technology can help you to make sure that your organization is actually equipped to deal with these challenging, turbulent times. And of course, HR transformation, on the other hand, brought to you by Personio. Then we stop for a quick break again, for a quick lunch break, check on your emails, have a quick bite, and come back because another 2 sessions, Power of Culture, continued, supported by Oracle HCM, and leadership will be happening alongside with it. Right after that, we continue the elective tracks, the Power of HR and Reimagining Performance, and Oracle HCM will be here with us on the Power of HR session, and Betterworks, with the reimagining performance, moving from performance management to performance enablement. So if you're curious to find out what it actually means, please do join us to that session. And we're concluding the day with 2 keynote sessions, 7 lessons from front line of digital transformation. John Fallon, the former CEO of Pearson, actually led the company through an 8 years long journey, moving from an analog to a digital organization. And of course, it's not really the technology, it's the culture, the people side of the business, and how HR supported John along the way. That will be the major talking point on this keynote. And the last keynote for today will be Elizabeth Comstatter here with us from NASA. Next practice is how NASA continues to innovate. And while speaking of NASA, many of you follow the news. You know that the NASA's DART mission yesterday hits the asteroid, the first ever planetary defense test. That's a marvelous, absolutely incredible achievement. This is Dimorphos. Just a bit of an interest if you haven't heard in the news. Now, the size of Dimorphos is a tiny speck. I mean, the planet Earth is a speck in the universe. Dimorphos is a tiniest speck. The size of Dimorphos is 163 meter little rock floating in the space, floating in the universe, 11 million kilometers away here from planet Earth. And NASA hit it. NASA's engineers and scientists managed to hit it with the DART, which is a 19 meters size of a satellite. So it's an absolute amazing achievement. I'm totally blown away by the power of science and the power of engineering. And of course, we shall be hearing the keynote how NASA continues to innovate and the culture of NASA. How to interact today. We shall have polls, we shall have chats, and of course Q&A. So please do participate in our polls and a Q&A. I'm hearing some echo. Hopefully it's only myself hearing an echo here and none of you. Okay, now it's perfect. So do participate in polls and the Q&A. Put your questions in the question box, and of course in the chat box. We're really looking forward to interacting and engaging with all of you. 1,500 people signed up to the summit from literally from around the world. So very grateful for your time. I know it's very difficult to find time to join these sort of conferences. So we're very happy that all of you here. Let's fire up the chat box. And now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker for the day, Ashish Malik. Ashish is the Associate Professor of the University of Newcastle, and the keynote is about leveraging AI for enhancing employee experience, the missing link for engaging employees. And a few words about Ashish. He's an Associate Professor, works at the University of Newcastle in Australia, holds a PhD from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, and an MA from TISS in Mumbai, India. Ashish served as the program commander, the Master of Human Resource Management program at the University of Newcastle in Australia, and presented more than 120 research papers, and author, co-author, co-editor of 6 books on the field of human capital, strategic HR, managing people in a post-crisis event, and many, many more. So I'm absolutely thrilled, delighted, and privileged to have Ashish Malik here with us. Ashish, please do turn on your camera and microphone. We would like to welcome you here on our virtual stage. I can see that you are here in a virtual conference room with me.
Hi, thank you for your kind words, and very good morning to all. It's an absolute privilege to be here amongst all of you and share my ideas and research.
Thank you, Ashish. The virtual stage is all yours.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll just start sharing the slides, if I may. Just allow me a second. So it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon in Australia, so tea time here, afternoon tea time. But look, welcome all. I work here at the University of Newcastle, and this is the fantastic building that you're seeing in the background is where the business school is, and I'm delighted to be with you all here. As in an Australian tradition, I would like to begin by acknowledging the country. I acknowledge the Darkinjung people as ongoing custodians, elders, ancestors, and future leaders on whose land I'm meeting you from and connecting with you virtually for this event. I also acknowledge any other indigenous people present and invite to connect with the place, land that holds them, or from where they are connecting. I think that's a really important point, given the topic that I'm going to be talking about, employee experience and connections with the space, the physical, the virtual, and the organizational. It is very central to my way of operating and holistic management of people. Anyway, without further ado, so I will provide you with a bit of a background of how I'm going to structure this. So I'll provide you with some background and my motivation for this topic, and then I'll explain a little bit more about the problematization as to what the issues are in the literature that are unresolved, what are the issues in the practice world that are unresolved, and then briefly introduce the study that we did, and which is available open access for anyone to read, in Human Resource Management Journal, a US publication, and then talk about a couple of contributions that we make not only to the literature, but also to the field of HR. So very, very quickly, I research a lot in the area of high performance work practices, particularly in knowledge-intensive firms. And my thesis was on the Indian IT industry. So you can see the link as to how my scholarship has built in this area. But also, after working for almost 8 or 9 years in performance domain, I started to also look at, with time, not just the business outcomes, but also employee-centric outcomes. And then came along global financial crisis, COVID, and other things. So the focus then was on how do people manage, in times of technological disruption or major environmental disruption, leading into aspects such as innovations in HRM and the future of work agenda, adoption of AI in HR, and so on and so forth, which then led to most recent study on employee engagement and employee experience. I'm mindful that this is the morning session, so some of you might like to have a quick poll. I've designed two or three very, very short polls, which I'll be integrating that as I go along in the session. So let's hope it works. I'm not very familiar with this platform, but I'm pretty sure it's a fantastic platform. So here's a question I'm going to share on employees at my workplace are highly engaged. So just if you could participate in this, and then use the chat box area to maybe have a poll, and then okay, we are getting some numbers. Okay, very good. I might just give it another minute or so. Well, maybe less. So employee engagement, as we know, has been quite overly researched since the seminal piece by William Kahn on what is engagement and how and why people bring their work selves to the workplace and what makes them committed, work, and so on and so forth. However, as time went along, what we also know that employee engagement became more of a episodic activity, annually, biannually, quarterly, and so on. So what we're seeing here is almost half of the people who have responded said, look, employees at my workplace are engaged, 51%, very, very good. 23%, not sure, don't agree, and another 25%, 25% or 24% are unsure. So we have a split house, almost a split house here. Let me start with another poll. Oh, not this one. There's another one, very quick one. So given we're talking about implementing an employee experience platform and the focus is on employee experience, I'd encourage you to also look at this poll. Has your workplace implemented an employee experience platform? Very simple question. Yes, no, maybe, not sure. And then give it another few minutes, or not few minutes. I've got a very short window here. Mihai will get annoyed if I say 2 minutes for every poll. So employee experience, as we know, is caught up in recent HR world and HR speak, but it's not so prevalent in the academic domain yet. So what we are seeing is employee engagement literature is still very robust. And I can share my experiences as when I was trying to publish this paper, the amount of resistance I had that this is one and the same thing. It's not anything different. So anyway, so we have about a third who have implemented, and a third who are who haven't implemented, another third, and then 3% unsure. So very good. And just the last poll, if you allow me, for those of you, of course, who have implemented an employee experience platform, do you think employees at your workplace are happy using it? Or they don't know what's happening? It could well be that you have an employee experience platform, but a lot of employees don't know that there's a platform and they're working and using it, but they might be calling it something else. So I'm just noting these down. We're going to try to integrate it later on as we progress. So another 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If it was a room, I'll do a bit of jog here. But anyway, okay, we've got the 34 responses so far. 24% say yes, 9% no. A third almost, or 29%, say not yet, unsure is the big one. Okay, no more polls, I promise. I'll get back to the session now. All right, so what we're seeing is almost a half are undecided in terms of engagement, and the other half says, yes, we have very happy and engaged employees, and those who are using it, a quarter of them, 24%, are also happy. Now, the motivation for my study was, of course, as academics, we have a look at the research, we have a look at the evidence, and what we find was an incredibly high level of literature, high level of resonation about employee morale is low, employee engagement levels are low. And as COVID came on, this only increased. Around the same time, we also had the issue of HR credibility and employee expectations of HR practitioners was also coming to a bottom low. And more recently, triggered by COVID or independent of it, or it came to the forefront as the whole concept of the Great Resignation, on which I am doing some further research at the moment. But so these are all, to me, they're all interrelated areas. And around the time when I collected the data, they were still surfacing out. And I said, look, this is a fantastic area on employee-centric outcomes, which is my new area of research. So let's have a look at an organization who's done this really well. And let's also look at, from an organization's perspective, that has implemented technology for engagement and or experience purposes. But when we look at the terrain of HR, it has, in the recent past, only become more complex. We've got increased interdependencies from a technological disruption point of view. The talent supply chains, as everybody would know, they are broken at the moment in almost every field, whether it's healthcare, education, retail. We all have huge issues with supply chain, but more so in the context of the organization that I was looking at, which was a large technology multinational. The whole idea of tyranny of distance, time, and speed in an M&E multinational enterprise are so critical that it creates its own set of dynamics for HR managers and leaders to look into. Additionally, as we are transitioning into digital transformation, and platformization is one such outcome of that, we have very limited knowledge of how AI adoption works, both in an engagement context, but also more specifically in an employee experience context. And this is becoming important because a lot of organizations are adopting the use of AI-assisted digital solutions. And as I saw here, we had about a third of the people who responded, 31% said yes, they have implemented something in employee experience domain. Two-thirds have either not or they're not sure about it. So it's a growing area of activity where we need some guidance, where we need some advice. Alongside employee experience or engagement, one of the pivots is the interactions between human and machines and the interactional trust that one has to have in the engagement and experience platforms for it to really work. And that is coming out quite strongly in subsequent research that I'm doing. But also, what we found was from the literature review was the solutions are not necessarily in the mainstream literature in HR. And we are borrowing from fields as diverse and disparate as marketing, psychology, economics, and information systems. And part of that is also leading to a lot of definitional confusion. Like I said earlier, at the time of submitting the manuscript and then publishing it, a lot of my colleagues felt, tell us something new, not something which is engagement. So they were interchangeably using engagement and employee experience. So that led us to deep dive further and look at how the two terms are different. I'm not going to go through all of this, but some of them you would be able to relate very easily that employee engagement is more episodic, annual, 6-month or quarterly issue, whereas experience is continuous, real time, ongoing, it's subjective rather than objective. Whereas engagement focuses on purely the work domain, we have employee experience, which resonates or travels across both domains, work and non-work domains. And similarly, it's non-deliberate and spontaneous employee experience, whereas employee engagement is very deliberate and planned. So we know there are differences. Some of them are subtle, but nevertheless, there are differences. And as I'll take you through further, what we found was, employee experience was actually an antecedent for or a driver for employee engagement. And that's why the paper and that's why the title, The Missing Link. So now, another related area which is of concern is when we talk about employee engagement, we often refer to engagement between the individual, their managers, their workplace, and so on, and how a person brings themselves onto their job roles and stay committed, have high level of involvement, experience that psychological safety. However, in an AI-mediated context, what we are finding is, you're actually having that interaction, not just the human-to-human interaction. It is mediated through a bot, through an AI application or tool. And again, the social exchange between the humans and human AI, human or human to AI, is very different. Not just in ease of use, of course, it's available at a click of button, but with engagement or a social exchange activity between two humans, you need to organize time, meet, speak, etc. More importantly, I suppose there is this interaction triggers imageries, but not ill intention. So a lot of people believe that rather than talking to a human, could be my boss or my supervisor, the conversation can get charged. The social exchange can be very specific and charged, but technology is often looked at as neutral for some perceived reason. Maybe it is, and that was certainly coming out from the discussions. But you have a speedy, objective, 24/7 engagement of the AI-mediated exchange rather than a very narrow, and it lacks scale, basically, human-to-human exchange, whereas you have a very high degree of scale in an AI-mediated exchange. You can just log in, interact, and engage with the information. So what we then thought was, look, there are certain aspects that we know about the literature, but then also certain things that we don't know, and this is where we think we need to go. So the literature broadly, in human resource performance domain, is very clear that you have these bundles of high performance, high commitment, or high on whatever work system you design that inevitably delivers performance. We know that. We also know from the literature on employee engagement and its links to a range of business, but also employee outcomes. We also know that technology versus human mediated interactions are different, and the perceptions about technology and perceptions of dealing with humans is different. But what we do not know enough about is how do we create a consumer sort of market for people within an organization. And this is where we borrow literature from marketing, customer experience, and customer engagement platforms, and try and see whether something in parallel can be looked at for the purposes of employee experience or developing AI-based platforms for HR. So the internal customer service experience, which is the employee in this case, of technology-mediated social exchange, that is relatively less known at the moment. So we looked at a very fundamental and quite an old theory that sets it out very beautifully. I mean, there are many more theories, and they're all old, and they're not quite well used in HR domain, by the way. So theory Y, for example, is not extensively used, but there's also the stimulus organism response theory, which comes across very strongly in both marketing literature, but also it has relevance for human resource management and employee experience. So an individual employee receives stimuli from the environment, co-workers, physical environment, work environment, non-work environment, and then processes that cognitively in their mind. And then based on their perceptions about that stimuli, they then have a response. It's simple, it's easy to understand, it has worked, and this is a very well tested and very well cited theory. However, hasn't found its way extensively in this domain. So we're building on this foundation, and then entering the field in that sense, and trying to define employee experience from an AI-assisted HRM practice perspective. And what we found was really, if we break it down, employee experience in an AI-assisted context of HRM is the degree or the strength of stimuli that employees perceive that is available to them from the practices, from the work environment. But they're also the perceived availability of a wider range of stimuli, not just from the work environment, but also in the entire employment life cycle. If you see all the touch points that they go through, right from the time when they are engaging with a new organization to the time they go, I'd argue that even after they have left, they carry a positive or a negative employee experience with them based on stimuli they have received. And finally, that perceived relevance of the stimuli. What are you going to do with it? How is it going to motivate you to do something else? How is it that going to convert into a response? So that's how we are characterizing stimuli in this study. So the context is a very, very large technology consulting organization, and we were fortunate to collect data from the Indian subsidiary, which of course is the second largest outside of the headquarter, might have been even the largest subsidiary operation of that multinational overall, employing hundreds of thousands of people, not just in the Indian subsidiary, but also across other subsidiary locations. So we had this opportunity to do a vertical slice of interviews, not just from people in HR, but also users of these AI applications, employees, subject matter experts, people who are designing it, and people who are selling it in business development to perhaps other clients. So that was one. So interviews are always quite handy to use in an exploratory design, something that is new, you don't know enough about. But we also had the opportunity to go through in depth the internal engagement surveys, the secondary data. The organization was very, very helpful in sharing a lot of data. Just the interview transcripts were about 125,000 words. So, but then other bits were also quite a lot. So we ended up with this humongous data set of themes, which we analyzed, and then came up with our own understanding of what is happening in this organization. So what we found was quite interesting. This organization almost had a people experience framework, wherein HR is a central piece, what we call as the verticals. So we found 6 HR practice verticals, and then they are underpinned by 3 horizontals. So we call them the my team, my unit, my career, my wellness, recognition, talent, etc. So these are core aspects of bread and butter HR type stuff. But we also found that, look, to really make it work in an AI-enabled framework, they need to also address the digital environment of the workers, the physical environments, and the values and the culture piece, which then cuts across each of these verticals that we're talking about. And all of these verticals had different applications through the platform for engaging employees, almost like you're going shopping for information and you need ideas for talent or career or recognition or voice. You can just have an interaction, a communicative interaction or an analytical interaction with these applications. So the very strong infrastructure of digitally enabled agile technology platforms. But also the psychological safety aspect was digitized by this organization, as was the values and culture. It will become clear in a minute. So we understood what employee experience is about, but we also then, because it's such a complex set of interdependent applications that we found that were being used as part of this organization's employee experience stroke engagement platform, we grouped these into largely on the basis of the purpose of the engagement platform, but also the nature of these engagement platforms. So at one end, you can think of the platform delivering very routine, transactional, temporary exchange of resources applications. And at the other end, you're very, very transformational and a continuous exchange, not temporary, ongoing, continuous. And then the nature of these applications or the engagement platform, you can group them into physical at one end and assisted with AI at the other, and hybrid in the center. So what we found was some of the applications were low touch, the purpose, because it was transactional, was low touch. But nevertheless, they were delivering quite high levels of personalized employee experience. And the two that come to my mind here are, the People Mart and the Team Insights platform. A lot of query-based, application and bot. Here it is. Whereas the Team Insights was somewhat of it's more at the cusp of transactional and transformational. Hence, you can see it's placed slightly above on this framework. At the other end, for transformational, where you have a continuous exchange of resources, the organization had created a physical, digital platform, and had a whole range of bots. For example, my competency bot, the talent bot, interactive individual personal assistants, and all of them. You can see here the focus changes. So it's interactive, it's advisory, it's problem solving, and it's hyper personalized and individualized. solutions for employees. So as employees are experiencing the use of these applications and bots, because this particular organization had co-designed them with employees, with software developers, but also across multiple subsidiary operations. They had had a chance to take input as to how they should collect, what type of feedback they should collect, and so on. What we found was this diversity of different target populations would use different types of bots was nuanced and very well designed. And as a result, a number of individual employee level outcomes. So, for example, the commitment was very high, job satisfaction and performance. So if I want to develop my career, the bot is prompting me for opportunities for development training, and it's also advising my boss what to do next. Hey, Ashish has got an opportunity here. Would you want to send him to this module, or would you want to then, because in his performance appraisal, it comes up that he wanted to diversify in this area, and so on and so forth. So for an organization of this scale and size, an organization that employs close to 700-800 HR practitioners, you can imagine the volume of activity and the complexity of activity, and hence the scale, the efficiency argument wins here in this organization. I mean, I could go on, but I think we have hard pressed for time. Oops, sorry, that was a bit quick. So what we found was the key takeaways from a managerial perspective are, if you really want to design an employee experience platform for better engagement, you must co-design the solutions by having constant feedback and input from employees. We need to have a collective focus. So not just the traditional bread and butter HR, that's not enough, but also look at it from work and non-work domain, but also from the moment they enter the workplace, their experience of scanning in to the workplace and then going to the cafe or getting their taxi back home or booking an event outside of work for family, well-being and work-life balance things. There's so many activities that create stimuli for the employee during their engagement and interaction with the workplace, that the opportunities are manifold, and hence a collective focus as to what are these touch points. You need to engage with them. The choice and the nature of AI quality and technologies is very important. In another study, we found the service quality of how the interface, the functionality of the AI application that you're designing, if that's not very easy to use, or it's not transparent, or you somehow find it too cumbersome, then again, that's not going to have a very positive experience. And I can already see that 24% are happy users, 9% are not happy. So there is an aspect of users who are in the not so happy category. So we need to also, although the senior leadership will set the tone for investing in these applications and these platforms, you need to have a broader stakeholder engagement and drive that change management agenda, because without involving them, you will not be able to develop a well-finessed, employee experience platform. And you should support them with the range of new skills development. And we found 3 areas of skill development: digital literacy, tech savviness, and technical change. How do you manage that? And then collaborating with AI, the human AI interaction. So some of them are not very comfortable with it, sharing that data. So building that trust becomes a very central piece in that, because it's mutuality of exchange. If you're interacting with an application and you're getting value and benefit out of it, then you tend to get more trust build. So the reciprocity has to be value positive. Okay, I think I might have to stop here, and then we are just on time.
Indeed, Ashish, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. I really appreciate this session and so many questions. I mean, it sounds like an extremely complex product from where you conduct this research. What time scale are we talking about? How long did it take to actually build this ecosystem of AI-assisted EX applications?
Yeah, I think the organization took about close to 3.5 years. So a lot of preliminary data gathering of insights of the employee pulse and so on. So I think 2017 or so the journey started. 2017, maybe late 2016, and I was fortunate enough to come at a time and study this when most of the parts were functioning quite well. So yeah, that's the time scale, and it's not that the end product is there ready for everyone to use. It's an iterative process, and new metrics will evolve and new data points will emerge that need to be finessed.
Indeed, I think that's one of the key points. Is that it's not a finished project. It's an ongoing, constant iteration to offer that level of employee experience. Do you have any data in terms of the outcome? How has engagement changed as a causation, as a result of this application?
Yeah, I mean, in this organization, well, I mean, it's a private limited. The subsidiary operation, you don't get that financial data. But apart from financial data, the engagement levels, as I recall, went up by about 2.5 times as a result of this. And this is more towards the end of the mature cycle. But earlier, they were in a trial and error mode, experimentation mode. But because employees were engaged and involved right along, they had ownership, they had buy-in. So that is also reflected in the engagement. So if I know something I'm doing and I'm part of it, I'm bound to be more engaged.
Brilliant. Very important message. Thank you so much, Ashish Malik, for being here with us. I'd love to continue conversation with you, but time is pressing. So next in our stage is Perry Teams, and I know that Perry is here in the waiting room. Thank you, Ashish Malik. People want to get in touch with you. They find you on LinkedIn. Of course, it's just a really quick sort of snapshot of this session, but obviously you can dive deeper if you have a chat with Ashish. And Perry Teams is here, ladies and gentlemen. Perry is the founder and the Chief Energy Officer of PTHR, international speaker, award-winning writer on future of HR work and learning. His 2017 book on transformation HR was Amazon's top 30 HR bestseller shortly after release. And Perry was also a young professor at Holt School of Business, Ashridge Management School, visiting fellow at Cranfield School of Management, a charterman member of CIPD, and in 2022, most influential HR thinkers. Perry Teams, thank you so much. Such a delight and privilege having you here with us for this next inspiring keynote. And I know you're bringing a very interesting, brand new stuff. So ladies and gentlemen, first time ever release session on Reinvented Reimagined Transformation HR. Perry, virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you, Mihai. Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, everybody. A great choice to be here today. Mihai and his team always put on an absolutely fantastic event, so it's great for me to be here again. Yes, I think if we build on some of the things that Ashish was sharing, it is really, really challenging at the moment to engage people. And so I'm thinking about how we can reimagine, reinvent, transform HR so that actually the people experience that Ashish talked about, the deployment of technology, smooths the path for people to feel like they're contributing very well to their enterprise and taking things forward. And it's a terrific opportunity for us to take things on and showcase where we go with this. As Mihai said, I'm very busy and I do an enormous amount of work in different guises. So let's start by having a look a little bit more about what I'm going to cover today. So and thanks to our sponsors, of course, who are on that slide there, because without them, this wouldn't be possible, and help Mihai and the team. We recently celebrated in my organization 10 years of operating. And if I go back 10 years, the kind of things we were worried about were the deployment of technology, like Ashish was talking about, and perhaps robots taking our jobs. I think we've got a bigger range of things to be worried about, and I'll talk about those in a second. But just a little bit about me, as Mihai said. Fantastically proud to have been named the #1 most influential thinker in HR by HR Magazine in June this year. You can find me on TED and TEDx. There's a couple of talks I've got about the future of work. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. I'm very, very pro non-hierarchical self-managed organizations, which is why I qualified this year in the Semco Style Institute's Self-Managed Expert Program. We're a democratic organization. We're also a B Corporation, so we really care about community, about the environment. We're a climate positive organization, and we're also a 4-day working week. And there's currently a big trial in the UK with 3,000 employees across a range of companies who are recalibrating the working week from 5 days to 4. And so far, 86% of those in the trial are saying we're going to carry on and continue with 4-day working weeks. So we're proud to be in that collection. But as I said earlier on, we've got probably more problems to challenge us and take forward our businesses in times of incredible turbulence. We have wars, we have a climate emergency, we have ecosystems under enormous pressure with agriculture, water, floods, and freak weather conditions. Of course, the pandemic held us in a grip for a couple of years, and there's potentially still an emergence with diseases that we need to be careful about. We have political polarization, and perhaps if you look at the United Kingdom at the moment, a degree of incompetence. We have the digitization of everything. We have the intrusion of technology into our lives increasingly more, as well as utilizing technology. Cybercrime predictions will look at something like 2025. $12 trillion worth of business will come through the cybercrime arena. So, I mean, I call it business, but of course it's the dark side. We've got the financialization and the fragility of economies, and certainly we're feeling that in the UK at the moment with the pound tanking. We therefore have a sort of a concurrent cost of living crisis, and HR's, I guess, sort of response to that is to try and look at how it can create as much benefit and financial stability for its people. I don't think we anticipated that too much a couple of years ago. And then, of course, we've got lots of social injustice. We have protests. We have all sorts of unfairness that we've got to consider in the workplace as well as in our societies and communities. So it's really tough to get your head around all of these issues and what that means for the world of work. So hanging on to hope is a little bit difficult. And I think there's something about how do we respond to that in HR? How do we reposition ourselves, look at the capabilities and the value that we create? And I'm going to talk to you as much as I can about what I think that looks like. But first, let's go on a bit of a journey. HR's origin, if you can track it back as far as the 1800s, was around the concept of worker welfare. It was the realization that people, as a vital part of enterprises, business and community service, we needed to look after people. So in salary sense, in health sense, in living sense, in education sense, which turned into the sort of mid-20th century version of what we would possibly call industrial relations or employee relations. And then there were unionized representations and voice to change things for the better for the people in the workplace and still create thriving businesses. So it was all about balance and inclusion and influence. We saw personnel arrive in probably the 1970s and 1980s, which took it to a lot more of sort of processes and very sort of rigorous ways of employing people and helping them understand and appreciate what they're there to do. And then we had HR. HR kind of emerged in the 80s and 90s as human resource management, lots of science, lots of new techniques, things like performance reviews, things like reward and recognition mechanics. And then that's kind of morphed more recently into people and culture. That's the kind of frame that lots of people put around it. We see lots more chief people officers, more than perhaps we do vice presidents of HR. So we've got that kind of people word symbolizing what we do. But I think the irony of working in a technologically charged and pandemically affected world is that we've returned to worker welfare. We are looking at how can we look after as well as enable our people. And we heard from Ashish when he talked about psychological safety. We heard about inclusion and how we can listen and help people find that quality experience of work. Some of that is through our duty of care. So it's ironic we've almost gone back to the roots of it, which is looking after people. Now, when I talked about HR, you may be familiar with this from the work of Dave Ulrich from the Michigan School of Business. This model of HR was introduced around about 1997, 95, something like that, and was built on 3 pillars of support and enablement for organizations through their people practices. So we probably don't need to unpack this very heavily because most HRM lectures and study programs will talk to this. But just a reminder, shared services with the kind of technology that Ashish was talking about, which is clearly advanced since the 90s, technology-enabled service provision. We had centers of excellence where we had experts in psychology, in organization design, in learning and performance who would work on the kind of mechanics of how we enable people and how we deploy resource to get the best from those people. And then we had business partners, which was probably the newest introduction at this point in time. Client relationship managers, people who were operating in a sense of understanding the business need, turning that into an HR requirement, and deploying and enabling HR solutions to some problems like high attrition, low performance, learning and development needs, and so on. Now, that model is probably still around, and lots of people would probably point to their HR structure and it would still have these hallmarks. Now, as Mihai said, I wrote a book in 2017 that was refreshed in 2021 with a second edition, where I wanted to see a little adaptation to that particular model. I didn't want to completely depart from the principles of clear accountability and interconnectivity within HR. So I created these 4 zones to try and see if we can get a little bit more pliability and adaptability in the HR world, because my experience of working in it, and then since working with it in client sort of sense and service and supply, is that the 3 verticals were sometimes not exactly cohesive. There was a little bit of baton passing and perhaps an unclear nature to who owned relationships, who owned the service provision, and who therefore owned the value and the impact. So this you'll see, and Ashish talked about the bread and butter of HR. Some of these are the kind of roles that HR people in the sort of mid-20s were starting to pull together. So employee experience is in there, diversity and inclusivity is in there, people and business intelligence is in there, and things like business analysts who are looking at results in the way that Ashish talked about, with the aggregation of all that data so that we can see trends and we can start to be more wise in the decisions that come from that data set. But also things like change, research programs, future skills. Increasingly, what HR was being asked to do was map a route to the future to help organizations skill ready for new technology, for different business models, and for different client, customer, and service demands. So this model that I put into the world in 2017 and refreshed in 2021 is operating in some organizations that I know of who read the book and wanted to kind of recalibrate what it is they're all about. And you'll notice I sort of subtly changed the titles from shared services, business partners, and centre of excellence to people strategy and partnerships, to people performance and development, to people and program support, and then for people and organisational transformation. Those were the kind of headlines that I was trying to capture with this model. But was it enough? I'm not sure it was, because these are the kind of demands that we are seeing, and Ashish talked about this in his opening, from some of the company needs and some of the market demands. We are looking at the sense of economics as being something that has to have a regenerative feel, whether it's invest to grow, whether it's diversification. There's often something about, can we make sure there's a regenerative economic field and an economic proposition for us as an organization, and therefore that we can use to sustain our performance into the future. Now, the emerging tech and advanced digitization has been with us for some time, but in the sort of COVID responses, we saw an acceleration of that with remote working, with use of digital connectivity like we're seeing now today. But alongside that, a lot of people kind of reset their expectations and actually rewired their lives, because this whole kind of sense of work as a purpose, it has to have meaning. We looked at some roles in the world of work and called them low skill roles, logistics, retail, and so on. Now, during the pandemic, they became key workers because they kind of kept the world going whilst we were locked down and sat still. And I think that sense of purpose is something that's really coming through strongly for people. They want to feel like they make a difference, they matter, and their work is important to not just them, but the world. And then on top of that, we have things like agile operating systems, where people are trying to constantly tune their machinery of work into customer demand, technology advances, and people's expectations. The value chain principle of how we can optimize at each stage, perhaps of production or service delivery. And another big requirement, I guess, has come through the climate emergency, with environmental, social, and governance now being an incredibly hot topic for organizations, in terms of how do we make sure we are doing the right thing, we are being fair and equitable, and we are looking after the planet and people, as well as our sustainable revenue streams. Within that is the emergence of a need to be sharper around strategic people planning. Some research in the UK in 2021 looked at this from a strategic workforce planning perspective and asked 90 companies, how do they do this? But only 43% of them said they have a robust mechanism for strategic people planning, meaning the other 57 are quite hopeful, chance, reactive, and perhaps not quite as strategic in their intent. And of course, we need to learn a whole new range of capabilities. And Ashish again talked to those. The kind of human AI bot interface is clearly something where we need some advanced capabilities, both in the workforce that we support and in us in HR to program, build, and deploy those kinds of technologies. So the demands are huge, again, coupled with those macro level issues. Now, this is a model that I devised ready for the refresh version of Transformational HR. I've called it 42 at Work. And if you know anything about literature and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy book by Douglas Adams, there is a quest in that book to find the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And the answer, quite flippantly, was 42. So that's why this is 42, because it could be the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything when it comes to work. It starts with the value side of things. What value is the organization there to create, but connected to individuals' sense of what they value in life? And that's where we kind of need to do this alignment piece before we even get going on what work needs to be done. So if I value civic duty and community service, I am likely to want to work for an organization where the value that's created is aligned to that. And perhaps that's local government, perhaps that's a non-profit, perhaps it's a humanitarian organization. But if I value lots of money in a sports car, I might go and work in commercial banking, because that is what value is created in that environment. So that's a very important alignment piece we don't always think about. Now, if we follow this model left to right, it acts as a design tool. It helps us understand the design that we need for the organization and the systems that we operate with, the principles, the kind of value set and the culture that's really important to us, that helps fuel the energy of the people who work there. And then the tools that we deploy within HR help us with accountability, so people know what their expectation is, the clarity of outcome and the ways of behaving, and the togetherness, how we link when we need to, how we support each other, how we can learn together, and so on, right the way through to what I call a state of flourishing. That's a flourishing organization and flourishing people within it. Now, if it goes wrong and flourishing isn't the outcome, we can go from right to left to find where the failure point is to put that right. So it might be that we haven't got enough development, we haven't got enough recognition. Well, let's work on those. So that's the idea behind this tool. So Ashish's data that he was talking about would be incredibly useful in this model. So if we've got this model as a starting point for what an individual employee experience looks like, aggregated to an organization's experience, how do we deliver that within HR against those huge macro issues and against those very strong demands that we saw earlier on those slides? Well, we need people who can understand what the meaning of work really is, what it means to people, and what value is being created, and why the organization exists in the first place. And sadly, when I talk to a lot of organizations, we've kind of lost that. We've forgotten it. We've diluted it. It's not as important as it should be. So I think there's something about restating purpose and restating that meaning and aligning it across the value chain that I think we need to do. We clearly need people who can design systems. Organization design professionals obviously sit in that space, but it's more than that. It's also processes at quite a low level, compliance and so on. Then we need some product managers. Now, these are people who will build the things that people use to access benefits, to access development, to understand how they can create a career path, to understand what happens when there's a maternity situation, whatever it might be. We need products. We need people to build things that other people can use. And then that needs to be supported by an operations team who absolutely know end-to-end employee lifecycle, can run recruitment campaigns, can think about onboarding, can think about development programs, can think about apprenticeship schemes, and so on, and so on. And experts. We still need experts, people who know employment law, people who understand the psychology of motivation, people who can work on strategic agendas, people who can research and analyze data. And that links to analysts. And Ashish talked about that with his exercise earlier. But we also need some science. I think we need more science in HR, actually, not less. So people, occupational and organizational psychologists have a lot to offer in understanding the dynamic of when people come together with a challenge or an opportunity, when we scale, how we mature, how we adapt, how we diversify. So I think there's a real strong need to kind of think differently about those roles within HR. Now, in 2021, I did some research. It was more meta research. I researched research and I aggregated something like 40 reports from Gartner, McKinsey, and the recognized big sources of it, vendor surveys, a bit like Ashish was talking about earlier on, and brought that together in a report called the State of HR 2021. We're going to do a new one in 2023, so look out for that in the new year. But importantly for me, I wanted to know the skills of the future according to those projections from those people. And here's the kind of aggregation of that. These are the things that 40 organizations looked at and said, these are most valuable when it comes to capabilities and skills. So performance analytics, psychology is in there, of course, experience designers, as we heard from Ashish, data science, again, as we heard from Ashish, org design, engineers in code, systems thinking, being able to understand all that kind of interconnectivity, the meaning makers I talked about, psychology of learning and agility so that we can respond to things. So if those are the skill sets, how does that map? So I've taken that kind of 4 interlocking circles that I produced in 2017, and this is kind of the big reveal. This is how I think we could reimagine HR. Systems designers who can interoperate with performance analysts and meaning makers and product managers to help us create a much more responsive, adaptable and sustainable model for our organizations into the future. Product managers who can build those things that people need with an acute sense of consumerism about how we access ticketing services, how we book and buy online, but how we turn that into a work-related proposition. Those psychologists I talked about, the practice leads, people operations to hold it all together with the technology enablement and the process compliance and so on and reporting. But at the heart of it, those meaning makers who can talk to strategists, who can talk to the board, who can look at the market demands and say, this is the meaning of what we are here to do. And here's the meaning of the challenges we're facing and what we need to do to turn them into systems, product, and test them with psychology and analytics. Now that's all good as a model, but how do we do that? So here's a little bit of a playbook of the early thinking that I'm coming up with this. So this model doesn't exist anywhere. It's quite literally, this is the first reveal of my thinking about what this model could do to depart from 3 verticals or even interlocking practices. The meaning makers will use that reason for being, the strategic vision, the business model, the impact narrative. And by that, what I mean is, what does success look like for us in a balanced, sustainable way? So not just profit, but community service, net zero, carbon reduction. All of those things have an impact and therefore are part of our narrative about if we exist, this is what we will measure as success. And the prosperity criteria talks to how we can regenerate our economic proposition and look after our people with cost of living crises and so on. And we create from that what I call the people proposition. It's like, why should you work here and what can you expect if you come to join us? That translates into a strategy so that we can really start to see how that looks in a kind of operating sense. and has to connect to things like ESG, environmental, social and governance, so that we can see how the human resource agenda absolutely plays into the priorities that go beyond simply operations and into the whole schema of things about community, about compliance, and about looking after the environment. And of course, very strongly in that as well is equity and inclusion. This is not something sunken inside one key role that helps people with employee representative groups. This is how are we equitable and inclusive and can leverage difference. And so we're a welcoming, appealing place for people to belong to. That then translates into our systems designers, who can then start to work on the organisation design and the operating model and those things we're perhaps more comfortable with now. But a team that can act very fluidly to a merger and acquisition or a new market opportunity or a compacting exercise where we're starting to sort of consolidate products and services so that we can stick to our core capabilities. The process design, the inventory of resources that we need in order to deliver that, so that's technology and materials. And the performance infrastructure. How do we know we're performing well? How do we reward that? How do we make sure it's sustainable, balanced and fair, and that we don't burn people out and so on? So the operating system manual, I suppose you could say. And then linked to that, a whole series of products. And I think the reason I talk about products is this is how it works in the technology world. You have product managers who own something that's part of a technology infrastructure to deliver a service and absolutely will make sure from end to end it does exactly what it's there to do and can be maintained and sustained and adapted and iterated upon. So I think we need a much more product orientation to HR and what it does. And then linked to that, the psychologists absolutely can help us understand what is the cognitive, emotional, social, psychological aspects of everything we do in the workplace. We still have too many toxic leadership principles that are adopted by some. We still have some very confusing rhetoric about, yes, we're here to look after people, but we'll burn you out. I mean, there's things like that that are incongruent. I think we need some psychological and scientific evidence-based inputs to help us understand how do we get this right? How do we adapt to changing demands and needs and different demographics and so on? And linked to that, there is a strong performance analytical approach. How well are we doing across a range of different factors, not just the bottom line, but how people feel, how their energy is, how their commitment to look after each other, their duty of care, their support, their development, their future prospects. I think we need to have a broader dashboard of what people's success looks like. And as I said earlier on, linking all of that together, the people operations team and the practice leads look after our compliance and legal and employment law introduction. They look after our employer brand. They help us with our talent acquisition strategy. And they absolutely help us with ongoing onboarding, ongoing belonging, performance, and learning and career trajectories. So that's my proposition. That's what I think an HR futuristic model might look like. And you may be sitting there thinking, wow, I'm some way off that. I might like it, but how on earth do I get there? I hope you'll recognize some of the traits are still absolutely what we need to be delivering within an HR function. But the reframe, I think, is really important. We need to think about ourselves in much more of a dynamic, adaptive, but scientific and evidence-led version. So if you haven't got any org psychologists within, that's something to perhaps think about as a future capability that you need to strengthen within your HR team and leverage that evidence and influence that brings perhaps to board conversations about motivation and recruitment techniques. So how do we do that? I think we start with setting our ambition. If we want to move to a model like this, we've got to think, well, what's the current reality of where we are, both capabilities, influence, model, resource, and so on. But also couple that with our ambition. So our ambition and our reality can come together to give us a very practical appraisal of where we are and where we want to be. Then start thinking about what's the purpose of the HR team now and the vision for it and the emergent strategy and the values that we have within the HR team, and how do they align and are congruent with the organisation? And does the organisation's purpose, vision, strategy and values need to have some form of amendment, update and reimagining? And then start thinking, how do we liberate teams? How do we create capacity? How do we get the right culture and ownership and change so that we can start to build iteratively, again, important, as Ashish said earlier on, from where we are now to a model that is much more dynamic and much more future focused like this. And then how do we make that operationalized? How do we turn that into processes, systems, technology-enabled changes that can really strengthen the proposition and the value that people feel HR creates for them? And then ultimately, we've got to analyze all of that and invest in our people. So either bringing new people into the HR arena from outside who've got those capabilities so we can learn from them, and or develop ourselves to pick up more of these kind of specialist areas, but also the interconnections between them. It won't be an overnight job. And as Ashish said earlier on, 3 years in the making for the people experience example that he talked about earlier on. So this could be our 2030 vision. It could be our 2030 model, and we can work and iterate towards it. So perhaps that model I came up with in 2017 is a stepping stone and a transition towards this kind of model. So in the spirit of Star Wars, I've taken from The Mandalorian that this is the way. There is a stated intent. There is a destination for us. There is a trajectory. There's absolutely a way that HR doesn't have to look and be like it is right now. It can be bold, dynamic, it can be visionary, and it can pivot and adapt to the kind of model that I've talked about there. And that's all from me. Thanks for hearing all about that. And as I said earlier on, our mission is about better business for a better world. And I think HR's got a strong opportunity now to reposition itself, reimagine itself, to create those better businesses that will help us with some of those bigger macro problems. Thank you, and back to Mihai.
Barry, that was absolutely fantastic. We do have, of course, many questions will be coming. And I'm sure people will reach out to you. Unfortunately, time is pressing, but we might maybe have 1 or 2 questions. So
sure.
A question from Joseph Fogita earlier on starting the presentation about which are some of the triggers advancing changes in HR roles, which measures should be undertaken to ensure that HR continues to give direction and leadership when called upon in times of challenges.
Yeah, I think the influence thing is crucial, right? So I think during COVID, we held organizations together from a welfare sense. And I think now we can start to point to, we're good at that. Let us help you with sustainable performance thereafter. But I think we need data and science to help us do that. So I think we don't just go with a sort of heartfelt plea. We have to get the head really strongly engaged. So if you haven't got good people intelligence and data now, now's the time to get it. And now's the time to weave it into your business cases.
Brilliant. Where do you see OD sitting in this model of yours?
Yeah, so I think it's very strong in the systems designer aspect. And really what I see at the moment is OD is a little bit of a best kept secret. And it's a little bit buried, and it shouldn't be. It absolutely should be almost like a vanguard type of operation, right? So I see it in lots of experimental test and learn type principles in that system design arena. Its work is never done. OD's work is never done, because as soon as you've crafted a model, you've got to then test it's working well and adapt and adjust and continue to iterate upon that. So I think they are at the helm of that systems designers area, linked very strongly to the meaning makers and the analysts.
And you mentioned it's a long vision towards 2030. So people who started with Ulrich, of course, Ulrich himself is reinventing himself continuously, organizing guidance systems, so on and so forth. How do you get executive buy-in? That you say that, okay, now we need to move towards a more ambitious goal?
Yeah, I think staged, and I think gently and experimentally. So if the only thing people take away from this is they think about the things they do as products, start to think about product management as a discipline. So you can Google search that. It operates very strongly in the tech world. Start thinking, can we create a product management approach within HR? And I think that's where I'd start, and link that then back to the systems designer. So I think you don't need to necessarily even relabel people as product managers. Just have that product management discipline. It's so strong and it's so powerful. That's where I'd start.
Brilliant. Perry James, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen,
thanks,
moving on. Right before we stop for a break, we have our friends here from Better Works. Bruce Warcroft is taking on stage, and we are going to learn about, in 5 minutes, about moving from performance management, performance enablement, and how Better Works can help you to navigate on this journey. Bruce, it's great to have you here. You're just back from your holiday, if I'm not mistaken, so I'm very appreciative that you actually made it to the event, and now the virtual stage is all yours in the next 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ali. So this morning, I'm actually going to focus more on the product itself. We're going to have discussions later on. My team are talking to everybody at 3 p.m. CET on reimagining performance, the power of HR. So they'll go much more into the background behind it. But I just wanted to give a quick flash of the products that we sell. The platform BetterWorks is a performance enablement platform, and it's designed really to make sure that everybody can really quickly and easily engage with the performance program. As Perry was just talking about, the really important thing to do within your programs is to make sure that everybody is moving forward to a new way of working, and everybody is really embracing these new approaches. Performance enablement is very much about that. It's about moving beyond that performance management structure that most people have carried out in the previous number of years, to a much more focused way of engaging people, engaging employees with that entire performance journey. And what we do within BetterWorks is we follow one of the big dictates of Josh Bersin about trying to keep people in their flow of work. And the easy way that we do that, if I just move my screen across, is by using Outlook as a real driver to make sure that people are thinking about performance all the time. If you look at my my fake Outlook here, on the right hand side, I've got a plugin from BetterWorks. This plugin will service to an employee all the time their objectives. That gives them the ability to give feedback to other people instantly. It allows them to review any conversations or engagements they got with their manager directly within here. And if you're like me, you're going to be drawn straight away to things that are not working. So if there are objectives that are falling behind or that they need attention to, the colors are just going to draw you straight in. I'll be working away for weeks, and then suddenly something will catch my attention on the objective side here, and I'll go in and carry that out. And rather than making people log into another system, you can carry out so much work within this plugin here. You can go and update your objectives directly, for example. So if I need to develop my world-class technical team here, and I've got a measurement of hiring a certain number of system analysts, I can actually come into the tool within Outlook, and I can actually update to say something's happened there. So really quick and easy way of updating information and keeping things really smooth and reliable. And the platform itself is about really making sure that there's lots of different sorry, I'm just going to get my screens to interact with each other. Lots of different ways of using that performance enablement process, whether it's goals, reviews, peer feedback, recognition. All of this is part of the toolkit that you can roll out to your organization to make sure it's really involving and interactive. Again, just to make it very simple for people to understand and use the tools, things like if people are being required to carry out learning, rather than making them double key things in what they're carrying out something maybe in the learning platform, rather than having to do the same thing to represent that they've carried it out in their objectives and goal setting, we can actually link the two things together. I've got a tool here, Udemy, for LMS. I can go into Udemy, I can pick up whatever course that I want to pull across, interviews as an example, search for the courses in my LMS, select the course. Now, when I carry out the course in my LMS, rather than having to come into a performance tool to represent we've carried that out, it will just automatically update and show the progress through here. So people don't feel like they're being taxed twice to carry out a single process. It's just a very simple way of updating and combining that through. And then another thing that I think is really important for HR experts is that you must feel like your police force quite often in the performance space. You're constantly telling people that they have to do their performance reviews, that they have to carry out activities. So what we try and do is we try and move some of that over to the managers. I can go into the screen here and I can highlight to managers key statistics of how their team are doing. So a manager can come in and they can see that the organization is expecting their employees to maybe have a certain amount of feedback or recognition received or given by them. And we can see for the employees, some the team here, some of these aspects are really good, some are not so good. If I click through to one of my examples, it'll break down my team and show me why we're hitting the metrics that we are. So, and also allows us to then interact with our employees and remind them of what they need to be doing. It's just a way, again, of just moving that much more to the view of the employee within the work that they're carrying out. And then all of this is really designed to help you to be very agile in the way that you work. So if you want to have different ways of working with different parts of the business, if you need your IT team to be working on a weekly schedule whilst your sales team are working on a quarterly schedule, you can set this up within our tool. The reviews, the check-ins, the interactions that people are having can be very bespoke for different groups, or even down to an individual level, to make sure people have their own options. Or you can allow managers and employees to actually just choose to create at any point themselves additional conversations and check-ins that are relevant to them. So if an employee needs to check in with their manager to talk about career development, rather than waiting till your pre-described end of year points to do that, they can just decide to initiate that at the point that they decide. There's a lot to this platform. I've just shown this in a few seconds, but just to say, very happy to talk to people in the future. If you want to talk to Better Works, please let us know. We would love to show you more of our platform.
Bruce, thank you so much. That was a brilliant overview of a very, very complex product, obviously adding agility to organizations live and making sure that the goals are connected and cascading down and effectively achieve and drive performance. Thank you so much, Bruce, for being here with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are ending the first session of the HR Congress Techfest, the plenary session. We shall be continuing at 10:30 Central European Time, 9:30 in the UK, with 2 elective tracks. Join us at the HR Transformation with Personio and the Power of the Employee with Oracle. Amazing sessions, amazing insights, all pure content awaiting for you. To access those sessions, of course, we're exiting from this webinar room, so just go back to our website, techfest.hr-congress.com. You find the login details and log into relevant sessions. And we really look forward to seeing you at the upcoming elective tracks. Thank you so much for being here with us. Excellent morning. We'll continue with elective tracks.